Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Yeah, welcome back to Twisted Tales, folks. So today's episode is going to talk about a provincial lunatic asylum located at 999 Queen Street West, constructed in 1835 in Toronto. With all its name changes over the years, changing of the staff and doctors, I'm sure this facility had many changes to the psychiatric treatment of patients. So I'm just going to assume that most were questionable treatments that were authorized there. It was the first institution in the whole province to care for the mentally ill. The construction, building, and opening of this fine establishment ended up being part of a larger shift towards the confinement of all the insane, mostly in Europe and North America, as care is perceived to be the responsibility of all the staff. So, most of these hospitals or wards specialize in the treatment of severe mental disorders, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, dissociative identity disorder, major depressive disorder. These are just a few amongst others. So, over time, many of these institutions usually succumb to massive overcrowdings, which entailed the shortage of staff. So just think of it like a giant warehouse containing the insane violence, and it's pretty much an everyday thing. Violence, murders, rapes, everything like that. Just, even with medical care becoming scarce. The facility structure was encompassed on all sides by a huge 50-acre property and was designed by architect John George Howard. 999 Queen Street West. So it was pretty much just like a chilling place known by all the town folk. In 1979, they changed the address to 1001 Queen Street West in order to wipe out any ill tales of the old address. The workers and doctors here believed in moral treatment. So pretty much why these walls were constructed was so moral treatment is basically where they took the chains off of people so they could have what you and I would call an ordinary life. So in an ordinary life, there'd be work, recreation, be treated kindly. So this theory was developed by Dr. Pennell, and was that all the mad people shouldn't be whipped and should have useful stuff to occupy their time. Example, libraries for them to read, dances, and outside activities. Over time, problems began to arise in the asylum. Many of the people admitted were actually, in fact, not mad at all, merely just destitute. So, the poor, old, and senile ended up at asylums, usually because they had nowhere to go. Staff began to complain about the amount of incurable and hopeless cases. Even money that was helped to fund the asylum was not adequate enough to maintain certain needs, which eventually led to overcrowding. So in 1863, they were forced to increase capacity to 400, eventually increasing year after year. In turn, people weren't being given the proper amount of care. Maintenance began to suffer, which slowly became a horrible and revolting place for anybody to reside in. Some patients began inscribing words, phrases, and X's into the wall that are still standing to this day, as, just a reminder for those to see and focus about their mental health suffering. Inside the walls, there are actually a lot of reported cases of rape, assault, and homicide amongst the patients. Suicide also occurred frequently. Eventually, the facility became a dumping ground for society's unwanted. After World War II, they developed the welfare state. A lot of mental institutions began to downsize and close. So one theory is that the state couldn't keep up with the running of the institutions and bailed out. This being the first time that welfare was introduced through the system. So this would actually support the unproductive people. It would by giving them a welfare check, which is actually cheaper than keeping them inside the walls of the institution. So they discharged a lot of patients, handing them out a check, and they were expected to live off however much that was per month. So a lot of people began to realize that institutionalizing had started to make people worse, not better. During the 19th century, most thought that asylums were to be therapeutic. In turn, mid-20th century, they were actually found to be anti-therapeutic. So finding more long-stay residents to not get better with time, and including some bizarre treatments. So after being discharged into the city, a lot of realized that the patients didn't fare out too well on the outside of the institutional walls. So roughly 2,000 psychiatric patients were released to Parkdale, a neighborhood near the institution. Eventually, the once flourishing and beautiful neighborhood became overrun with drugs, poverty, crime, homelessness, and most of which still occurs today. The final phases of demolition and the rebuilding in the early 70s had a dramatic impact on the perception of 999 Queen Street. One staff member remarked that professionals are starting to see us as a place to refer people, not just as a dumping ground anymore. The new buildings and treatment regimens started to generate pride, enthusiasm, and hope to all the staff. In 73, it was reported that staff now included psychologists, psychiatrists, physicians, nurses, social workers, occupational therapists, and some rehabilitation officers. So they all contributed to treatment while working together, and the newly developed treatment programs ended up being created. On September 25th, 2010, 9 plaques have been erected around the walls, which these pay tribute to patients who lived there or were institutionalized over the years. So some even include their stories about their stay. Even some treatments conducted there seem to be ungodly by some. So some of the treatments that they tried throughout like the 40s, 50s, whatever, they included physical restraints, which applied in moderation were thought to cure patients. Other treatments included seclusion in rooms, strapping patients to chairs, leather restraint muffs, handcuffs, straitjackets, and a crib bed. Now, a crib bed cradle is actually a frame installed at the foot of the bed to keep sheets or blankets off legs or feet, to help with circulation, sensitive skin, or in keeping skin dry, especially if the patient is lying in bed for long periods of time. So I'm glad that most of these insane treatments are no longer used today, although some of them seem to be tweaked just enough to accommodate and help patients. So I mean, that's pretty awesome. So I guess that's it. Just a little story about an asylum. That's all I got for you, folks. Enjoy your work week. Have a wonderful day.
In 2011, Justice Robert Montgomery, born in Africa to a Canadian doctor and his wife, returned to CAMH to talk about his childhood growing up on the grounds of mental health institutions across Ontario. Robert's father held a succession of positions, eventually becoming the medical director at the Ontario Hospital on Queen Street West in the 1940s.
Well, I'm Robert Montgomery. I'm a retired judge, but still working. And I lived here on these premises for a lot of years in 999, as it was then known. We had our living quarters up the stairs from the switchboard and administrative offices on the ground floor of the central building. And on the second floor, we had our bedrooms, dining room, and living room. They were quite large rooms. I think my brother and I shared a bedroom that was about 30 by 30, and the ceilings were 18 to 20 feet high. So we could play football practically in there. I went to Parkdale Collegiate for the time I lived here, and they in addition to calling it 999, they called it the Funny Farm, the Bug House, and the Loony Bin, and they had wonderful names for it. So my brother and I had to stand up for the proper concepts of mental health, and we held our own pretty well because we were both heavily involved in athletics and weightlifting, so nobody pushed us around. Another time I was playing baseball down at the baseball diamond on what was then Sunnyside with a bunch of guys from Parkdale, and an officer came along. He was afraid someone would get hit with a ball on the boardwalk which ran along there. So I think we were all in the Sunday school class together as well, and he questioned all of us. I hung back. He came to me, and he was a real Irish cop, and he said, "Where were you born?" And I said, "Africa." And he said, "Where do you live?" I said, 999 Queen. "Another lie, boy, and I'll lock you up." So that was the way 999 was viewed by the community in those days. We're fighting a rearguard action all the time.
By the 1940s, the hospital housed some 1,000 patients. Its imposing original asylum building, with its enormous dome, dominated the western Toronto skyline.
That dome carries a story for me. There was a patient in the hospital at that time by the name of Gurney. He had been a motorman with what was then the Toronto Street Railway, and he developed a fixation that that tower governed his life, and it was telling him what to do when he was running his Queen Street streetcar, and was eventually institutionalized here for a lot of years. He had a great interest in woodworking because of his boat building skills when he'd been a young man in the Maritimes. And the second time we came back to the hospital after the war, Dad decided to build a boat in the buildings that are still remaining.
At the back wall.
At the back wall.
The original asylum building was demolished in 1976. Today, only portions of the original wall and two former workshops built in 1889 remain from the hospital's historic past.
Gurney undertook to help him build the boat. He did most of the work. The boat was a success, but the greatest success was what it did to the patient. It changed his whole focus on life. He lost the fixations that had caused him to be institutionalized, and he left here and continued in the woodworking business in a casket factory, and he never returned to mental hospital after that.
Twisted Tales.